Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Hamley. They call it the silent killer, hypertension, or better known as high blood pressure. Why the silent killer? Because it can go undetected for long periods of time and can lead to death. Most people with high blood pressure have no symptoms. In fact, more than 50% of the Black population in this country has high blood pressure, more than any other racial or ethnic group. Up next on Another View on Health, a new study on the effects of hypertension on African Americans right here in Hampton Roads. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Hamley. Before we get into our conversation today, I have to tell you that the YWCA of Southampton Roads has done a thing. Okay, so they are about to host next Wednesday the third annual conference on REST, and REST stands for Racial Equity and Social Transformation. Now, it's going to be held at Norfolk State University's campus, and it's in partnership with the Center for African American Public Policy, and it's on June the 5th from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Now, it starts out with a breakfast, and during that breakfast, they have decided to honor me as the 2024 Laura Eder Davis Titus Community Transformation Award winner. Now, if you don't know who Laura Eder Davis Titus is, she was born at the beginning of the Civil War, and she was the member of the Freedom's first generation in the United States. She was among hundreds of African-American women who redefined their place in society through education, civic endeavors, professions, and community advocacy. And she actually started what is now known as the YWCA of Southampton Roads. So the organization says this groundbreaking award is given to a champion in our region who has an enduring dedication to truth, transformation, and commitment to promoting equity and anti-racism, as well as longstanding service to our community. I am beyond blessed and incredibly honored to receive this award. So if you are interested in going, tickets are available. You can go to ywca-shr.org, ywca-shr.org. Thank you, YWCA. Thank you, community. I appreciate it so much. So, why are more than half of the Black population in this country dealing with hypertension or high blood pressure? Why is it so prevalent in the African American community, and what can we do about it? Joining me now to talk about a new study of high blood pressure among African Americans in Hampton Roads is Iris Lundy, Director of Health Equity with Sentara Health. Hi, Iris. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm good. Reverend Jerry Holmes, pastor of First Baptist Church, Bute Street. Hello, Reverend.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Great. And our favorite cardiologist in the entire world.
Oh, man.
Dr. Keith Newby, and who is also my co-host here on Another View on Health.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Man, I tell you, I couldn't ask for any better introduction. Thank you.
So before we get into the thing, I got to ask you, how was the semester? Are you done this?
You know me.
I know you're not done, but
you know I do 8 million things. I started another course. I don't know if I know.
How many degrees will you get out of all of this?
I know. I'm working on it. But I would say this. I am doing a chief medical officer program too. So that's in conjunction with the public health degree. So that's going real well. Did I tell you I was appointed as a professor over at ODU?
No.
Oh, yeah. So I just got that professorship in public health.
When are you going to have time to teach?
I know.
Okay, as long as you don't call and say, I can't do another view.
Listen, right. This is like primo for me. So that I tell everybody else, stop. I have to do Barbara's show.
Oh, God. All right, so let's get to today's topic. So Sentara Health has joined into partnership with a bunch of other people, and we'll talk about who they are, to talk about high blood pressure. Iris, why Sentara Health and why now?
Well, honestly, Barbara, it probably should have been a long time ago. And I think we've done things in this space, but Dr. John Brush, who is the principal investigator on this particular study, he had a friend who is at Mass General, I think, or at Yale. And, thank you. And so they were at Yale, and they asked him about this study. We have been doing so much work with our faith community, which has been a tremendous partner to Sentara. So it made sense. So when John approached us, it was like, hey, we should consider doing this with our churches.
Okay. So you're working specifically with churches.
Yes.
Reverend Holmes wanted your church, First Baptist Bute Street, which is also your church,
yes,
Keith.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
You all are involved. How did Sentara approach you, and what's the benefit to you from your perspective of doing this?
We were absolutely excited to explore the opportunity. When we met with Dr. Brush, we explained, certainly from the First Baptist Bute Street side of the house, that we look at this health for our community, not as an additional thing that we should be doing, but certainly a part of our overall mission to help people live greater and richer lives, to live out really all that God has for them. So for us, it was really finding the right partner to go into the community to help make the changes that we desired for it.
Did you have to convince your congregation to participate, or?
No, not at all. First Baptist has always tried to be a mother to the community. Being the First Baptist Church here in Norfolk, giving birth to so many other congregations, it's a natural place for us to serve as the flagship, to be able, again, to help bring healthy thought, communication, information, and empowerment to our community.
Okay. So now, Keith, you're a part of the study.
Yes.
And you're a
co-investigator.
Co-investigator. Okay.
Yes.
What does that mean? And tell us about the study itself.
Essentially, what we're trying to do, and this is a problem we have with hypertension treatment, period, is how do you help with guiding patients to a healthier lifestyle with hypertension? A lot of the things you will find are driven by not just social determinants of health, but lifestyle majorly, and that's part of that social determinant background. So the study was designed to look at different interventions to see what we could do. As a control group is a standard way we treat people. You come to a doctor's office, they diagnose you with hypertension, they give you a plan, medicine, whatever, and they see you back the next time. Hopefully your blood pressures are better. Hopefully.
If you're taking your medicine.
If you're taking medicine. And that is a crucial part of this because, again, compliance, if you look at historically, compliance in medications is only 30%. So that's why I always laugh when people always tell me, I take it every day. I'm just looking at them. Let me see your bottle. But I saw that to say that, compliance is an issue. I mean, that's hard to, when you're not used to taking medicines every day, to ask somebody to do that and to change their lifestyle, because everything is dependent upon sodium, weight, activity, all that impacts. So the study was designed to say, if you look at standard way we treat it versus two interventions, one is, we have these tablets now where you can check your weight, blood pressures, and they monitor that every day versus this kind of control with the tablets, and you can look at the blood pressures and weights every day, but also have a community health worker working with you to make sure, they're talking to you, find out, are you taking medicines every day, are you following the diet? That additional intervention is to see which one of those two interventions. Well, firstly, do either of those two interventions work for people? Would they have a better blood pressure control? And then secondly would be which one might be better out of those two, and would that community health worker impact the study more so than if they just had the tablets alone versus standard medical treatment.
Okay, so the whole idea is to try to figure out what's the best way.
What's the best way to manage your blood pressure?
So, Iris, I noticed that, we got Second Calvary, New Hope Church of God in Christ, The Mount, Rehoboth Baptist, Faith Deliverance, Historic First Baptist Church, Ebenezer Baptist Church, Gethsemane in Newport News, Six Mount Zion Baptist in Hampton, and New Beach Grove Baptist. Those are all fairly large churches. Am I correct in that? Or is there a mixture of size?
I think you would say they were medium to large.
Okay. So I guess my question is, are we reaching, one, the smaller church population, and two, are we concerned about reaching young people in this study? Because am I correct, Keith, in that that blood pressure is also going up in our young people?
Very much so. It's and they have a mixed variety of people. The first question, it really in the study design, is to say what intervention might work the best. That's really the design, is what intervention works best to get people's blood pressure control, because we do know, and we could talk about this, as complications of hypertension. So when you're ready to get into that, that's why this type of intervention is so important, because what we see, and I think I've mentioned this to you before and on the show, is look at in any dialysis center in Hampton Roads, go anyone and see who's in there. I guarantee you 95%, if not more, are African American. And why do we have kidney failure? Because of hypertension and diabetes. Those are your two biggest risk factors. So if we can find a way to at least address one of those two and get the hypertension first, because that's probably the least problematic to try to address. Diabetes is a whole nother show. So, but I think if we can do that and we can figure that out, that's the impact we can make.
Okay.
So I'll go back to your question. So yes, those churches are medium to large, but they're also working with other churches that are in the community. So you're looking for a space that's large enough so that you can get enough people in to screen, to meet the criteria to get into the study. So they're partnering. So they may be leading it, but they're partnering with others around. The second part of your question was around, and Keith started with it, was about the age.
Young people.
I mean, but when you started out, you talked about how it is the silent killer. I mean, we think about the stress that people are under, especially young people. The study starts out with those that are 18. So if they're 18 and older and have been diagnosed with hypertension, newly diagnosed, it's uncontrolled, they certainly want to go to one of those places so that they could get screened and potentially get into this study.
Jerry, how do you keep or overcome the whole idea of study, you taking my personal information, Tuskegee, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's still a part of our culture. How do you convince people, within your congregation and others that you're working with, that this is okay?
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. That's one of the things that we talked about in our initial engagement with Sentara and Dr. Brush, to make sure that we held our reputation as a leader in our community, as one's a pillar of truth in our community, that we made sure that everything was above board and those kind of myths that we dealt with in open honest. And so I think for the African American community, the church has always held a special place. It is so much more than just about their relationship with God, but also how we engage with politics, how we engage with injustices in the workplace. It's always been that culminating place for the African American community that could help, again, move things forward. And so, again, because of that trust level, because of the relationship that the church has had, is July will make 224 years that it's been on the battlefield. So you think about the Civil War being over in 1865. The church was already 65 years old. So being that pillar in the community, our voice to be able to say, this is something good. This is something that can be beneficial, not just for you who are participating, but for your family members as well, and for generations to come. And so it wasn't that hard of a sale because of the previous work, that had been going on with the church and work that it's trying to do in the community.
Okay. And audience, because I don't want the sisters calling me. I love them to death. But the pastor said it was okay for me to call him by his first name.
Absolutely.
Iris said it was okay to call her by her first name. And you already know I call Keith by his first name. So there you go. So Iris, give me the nuts and bolts. If I decide I want to become a part of this study, if that's even an option, but those who decide they want to become a part of this study, what, other than you said age was 18 and above, what else is involved? What does the person have to do in terms of being in the study?
Well, let's say you went to see Keith and he said, you know what, you now have hypertension, high blood pressure. Well, you say, he might even tell you, look, there's a study going on at our church, and get you connected. Each church has a site coordinator there. Okay. We have site coordinators also. They have times of the month where they get together and they come in. There's a questionnaire, some screening that'll happen. And then there's a randomization, right? So it's not like we pick and choose which part of these three, whether you're going to. So there are three things that could happen. You could get a remote blood pressure cuff. You could get a remote blood pressure cuff and get a nurse practitioner who's following you, or you could have those two and get a community health worker also, because that's the other piece. If we have someone in the community who looks like us, talks like us, who is a part of us helping with this, doesn't make a difference. So there's a randomization. We don't decide who gets who, right? Exactly. That's all happens behind the scene. But so that's how it happens. And then you get in that study. You come back every so often. They tell you how often you come back. You get your blood pressure checked. You get there are questions that are asked and that kind of thing. That's high level.
And how long is the study? How long have
five
we
years,
studied?
Yeah,
so it's 5 years. Mm-hmm. So as a person in the study, you're committed for 5 years?
5 years.
Wow, that's a big commitment.
Yeah, and what they're doing every couple of months, they're bringing additional folks on. So each site will hold up to 36 people at their particular site, for a total of 360 that'll be in this study.
Okay. Now you're in partnership with who?
You talking about me personally?
No, I mean the study.
It's the
Sentara Health.
It's Sentara Health along with these other institutions. I think
it's a Yale,
Mass
General.
Okay.
Houston Methodist.
Yes.
Yeah. Houston Methodist. Yeah. Okay, so Yale, Mass General, and Houston Methodist.
And I believe it's an NIH-funded study, isn't it?
Well, it's definitely a PCORI grant.
Yeah.
So
I think it's part of the NIH.
And these areas were selected because, do we know why or how?
Well, I'm sure.
Or did people just apply?
I think what typically happens is this is our relationship kind of things. You know, you look at other institutions that have similar academic backgrounds and you know who they partnered with before. I think the issue became because Sentara, Dr. Brush, had a relationship with the Yale doc who was really leading the charge on this. And, you know, a lot of times studies are born out of conversation. You know, what's the situation in your area? Are you finding the outcomes are problematic? And they said, well, we need to figure out how do we address this. So a lot of times I find studies are born out of relationships, and then those relationships grow, and then they look at, well, who else can bring something to the table? You know, because you want people that know how to conduct a study, because that's going to be important. Because if you get bad data, that's not going to help anything. So you want folks that have the background and understand how to perform research, and then to get that data collected, and then to make sure they're enrolling people on time, you know, and they're following the people like they're supposed to, and the data's being collected on point. So you don't want to have an institution that has no real research background doing it, because you may not get the kind of data you want to see.
So. Do you have to be a member of one of the 10 churches that are in the study, or as long as you go through that church? Is that what the question is? Okay.
You could just go right up to them and say, hey, I have high blood pressure. I'd like to be a part of this study.
Okay.
And they could do that. I was going to say that, because this is a patient-centered grant, so when they looked at this, they're also looking at who has connections in the community, because they're not trying to find someone who is going to sit somewhere and kind of guess about what's going on. This is not an intellectual study. This is really not an intellectual only. It's getting into the community, meeting with real people and making real changes. And I think that's the difference with this. And I think that's one of the reasons we were invited to participate and that eventually the grant was approved, because we have been working with faith communities and the faith community wants to see this change for our community.
Yeah. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call and join our conversation. Would you think about joining this study? What are your concerns? What's your excitement about the opportunity? 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. So Keith, let's remind people of exactly what high blood pressure is.
So, I kind of laugh. A lot of people will ask me, they say, you and Barbara seem to work really well together, and you seem to just know each other's thoughts. And, I was just thinking, I said, we haven't talked about what the definition is. This is like so crazy. I mean, literally, that's when I put my finger up, I was about to say, we need to talk about definitions. Oh, man, I tell you. Anyway, getting right back to it. So the thing, and this is where I want to make the point, because when you look at the definition of hypertension, now there's three really stages. There's elevated blood pressure, there's stage 1, stage 2 hypertension. And elevated blood pressure, and this is where people are going to freak out. Well, let's start with what a normal blood pressure is.
What's normal?
A normal blood pressure is less than 120/80. Less than. Okay. So if your systolic, your top number of blood pressure is 120, that is an elevated blood pressure. And a lot of people will, listen, I
they
run
go 120, I'm good.
Yeah, and that's not good. That's not normal. Normal is less than 120/80. Now, an elevated blood pressure is if your top number is between 120 and 129. That's an elevated blood pressure. Now, the bottom number still needs to be less than 80. Stage 1 hypertension is if your top number is between 130 and 139, and or the bottom pressure of the diastolic is between 80 and 89. So if your pressure is 115/82, that's stage 1 hypertension, because it's either one. The top or bottom number.
Either number.
So if you're 132/70, that's stage 1 hypertension. Stage 2 hypertension is if your top number is 140 or higher, or if your bottom number is 90 or higher. That's stage 2 hypertension.
And when you're at stage 2, what is happening in your body?
So
stage 1 and 2, really.
Think about what happened, and I'll give you a prime example. When you talk about pressure, think about what that is. So that is the force being exerted at any given time. So think about, like, say, if you take a water hose and you cut the water hose on full force and you hit that handle and you focus on one part of a wall, over time, depending on how high that pressure is, you're going to start denting that wall eventually because of the high force of pressure. The same thing happens inside your body. So that's why we look at, like, kidney disease. Because there's a lot of branches in your body in terms of vessel branches. So when the force is hitting in between a branch, you're hitting all that force right in between. Like if you have vessels like this and that force is hitting here as they're coming up, that is going to damage this vessel because you got that same level of force that's doing it.
And so it's constant.
Constant. So the higher the pressure, the higher the force, the more damage you're going to have. So when you talk about taking the inside layer of a vessel, the intimal layer is that's your living tissue, because vessels are living tissue. You're damaging that vessel, and what happens to damaged tissue? It starts to try to heal. It's got a sclerose, meaning it's going to get fibrotic or hard, and that's when you hear the term atherosclerosis. That is a damage to a vessel that happens for various reasons. One is pressure, one is cholesterol, and one is oxygen-free radicals.
And once it's damaged, can it be repaired?
Yes and no. It depends on how bad it was damaged. You can reverse a lot of things, but the problem, and this is why a study like this is so important, is because the problem in our community is, getting people to take this stuff seriously, because hypertension is difficult because of its asymptomatic nature. If you think about, say you have an infection.
Asymptomatic means no symptoms.
Yeah, no symptoms. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm working on it. So asymptomatic means no symptoms associated. So you think about it. So if you have an infection, you feel lousy. Somebody says, take this antibiotic for 10 days and you're going to feel better. You're going to do it because you feel lousy.
Except that when you get to day five, you feel better.
If you feel better, the question is, will you continue that medicine after day 5? And I always laugh when I do these talks in churches at different events, and I say that, I would keep taking it. I said, really? I said, really? I said, and that's natural. I've done that before. Yeah. So you're gonna do things until you feel better. Once that is gone, will you continue it for that full time? So then fast forward, you trying to get somebody to take something every day for potentially the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. You're trying to get them to change how they have lived for their entire life, what they eat. I mean, you go to places and they have, certain choices we make are not good for our blood pressure. So that is an issue of trying to get people to change behavior patterns. It's one thing if you felt bad with hypertension and somebody asked you to change it, you probably would do it. But I have people, even then, they still won't do it. They
still won't take that medicine. If you're just joining us, we're talking about hypertension in the Black community and strategies you can use to stay healthy with Iris Lundy, Director of Health Equity with Sentara Health, Reverend Jerry Holmes, pastor of First Baptist Church, Bute Street, and cardiologist and co-host of Another View on Health, Dr. Keith Newby. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Have you been diagnosed with high blood pressure? And are you taking your medicine? How do you make yourself accountable for taking your medication? Because I have to tell you, I am on high blood pressure medicine, and I take mine every morning at the same time. It's a part of my get ready routine because that was the only way I could remember. Yeah. Before it was, and then there's the whole question of, and this is a good question for both of you medical people here on this panel. So some people say you're supposed to take blood pressure medicine at night. Other people say you're supposed to take it during the day. So which is it?
I'll tell people, take it when you know you're going to remember to take it.
Okay,
because
what
it kind of does to a certain degree, and this is the interesting part, when you look at data, the reason data is important is because it helps us, and the reason why studies like this, because it helps direct how we treat certain conditions. There's a circadian rhythm that we have, and circadian rhythm means the kind of peaks and dips and valleys of our care. And when you have a circadian rhythm of blood pressure, most people it's going to be higher in the morning, lower in the evening. Some people it's the opposite, but majority of people are higher in the morning, lower in the evening. Depending on how high their pressures are in the morning can impact their risk of developing heart disease. Those who have your pressures are 140/90 in the morning, you have probably it's almost a 50% higher risk of developing heart disease than if it was lower in the morning. So these are why these things are important. And if you have like this kind of study where you're actually monitoring blood pressure more than once, where you multiple times, because that's the biggest challenge.
Because you're taking your blood pressure a couple of times a day, right?
Yeah, it may be more than that. And, and it's keeping a log of that. So you get to see what those pressures run. And then it helps us as physicians because the thing is interesting. Insurance companies won't pay for ambulatory blood pressure monitors. And ambulatory blood pressure monitors are when people have cuffs that they have at home that take it like every so often. And most of the time they do 24 hours of that. And you're doing that because you're trying to see what's the range of their blood pressures. Because some people, they go to the doctor's office. Then they could have white coat syndrome, and I don't know if everybody may or may not be familiar with that, but that's when they go to the doctor's office and their pressures rise. But it may be fine everywhere else. But to understand how that person's cyclic blood pressure runs helps us know that, we're controlling it. Because if we're not controlling your blood pressure, then hence the higher risk of kidney disease, heart disease, and strokes and heart attacks. So that's really the thing is, how do we make that impact? And that's why, people like Pastor Holmes, he's my dude. So, I ain't going to, to me, when I heard he wanted to be First Baptist minister, I was like, thank you, Jesus. Because I know he's got a lot of heart for the community. And that is so important when you talk about this kind of study, because that trust factor that you have to develop. Who's going to listen? If you sit high on the mountain somewhere and trying to tell somebody what to do, the likelihood of your impact on them is going to be minimal. But when you have somebody in there, Pastor Holmes will roll those sleeves up. He'll do anything and everything to make something work. And when you have somebody like that, that builds that trust. So when he says, listen, I've vetted this. This is a good thing for you to do. That trust that you develop is why he can pull, and just like other pastors, other churches can pull people in and get them to see there is value in what we're doing here.
And I mean, we need to be more involved in studies so that we can actually find out what's happening with our community. Go ahead, Pastor.
Dr. Keith made me think about something in introducing young people to their physicians early. I think it's going to help the long range challenges that we have. And I think that's part of that changing behavior, Doctor. We talk so much about how do we align things once they have gone off the road. And I think that early relationship with doctors, physicians, caretakers at an early age can help that process. But if we are in a situation in which our community does not build those kind of relationship, does not have access to medical services and relationship with physicians and all, then it becomes a challenge. And that's where the distrust, I think, comes in a lot.
I wanted to ask you, based on this study, and actually, Iris, you can answer this also. So, we all know about church dinners, right?
Okay.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, here we go.
No, but I mean, my question, if you're taking the time to do this kind of a study, then are you also looking at other things that are part of the church tradition that need to change? So, for example, have you changed the menu at First Baptist when you guys are going to have a church dinner? Have you gone to baked chicken as opposed to fried chicken or whatever? You know?
You see some of those things, and one of the things they're trying to do with the study is not interrupt those individuals' lives too much, because you'll start to move the needle of the study. But out of it, you bring up a great point. In our learnings, what do we do with that information? From, again, as you're indicating, offering things with less sugar, offering, again, things that have less grease and those things kind of in it. How do we cook? And one of the things we do at the farmers market that we are privileged to partner with the Newby Foundation on is to have a lot of cooking demonstrations. How do I make things taste good and enjoyable and something I'm used to, but yet make it more healthy? And so there's a lot of seasoning and things of that nature that we can use. And so to go back to your question, Barbara, I think you're going to see fallout from the study, more intentional efforts in the community, again, to share information with people and to find substitutes that we still can have an enjoyable meal, and it doesn't have to taste like like we eat clay.
Go ahead, Iris.
Barbara, Bishop Riddick, who is also a part of this Gethsemane, even before we got in the study, he had already taken his church and several churches on the peninsula through something like this. They did a 16-week of changing their diet, and they had people in it. They saw a reduction in blood pressure, a reduction in cholesterol. They saw an improvement in mental wellness. And Bishop Riddick himself, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but he decided to do a plant-based diet, which really helped him personally. So I think pastors are getting engaged and seeing the value, but so are the participants. And they're wanting to do something different.
And you were talking about the community people who would be working in one of those three groups. Are they... Is diet one of the areas where, and so in other words, will there be nutritionists or people to help you to change your diet if you're a part of the study or not?
Not in the study, but for churches who say, or any faith congregation who says, you know what, we're interested in something like that, they could reach out to us. We're doing this everywhere, like where we're doing something separate with helping with things like that, some work that Keith and I have done. And Dr. Look, I'm always calling you Dr. Holmes. Pastor Holmes has been great. He has partnered with us on anything we have asked. And that's the other thing. I mean, we're talking about hypertension in this study, which is so important. You talked about medication. Let's just say this part too. Sometimes I don't take my medicine because of how my medicine makes me feel. So if I don't feel comfortable enough to have the conversation with you to tell you that it's aching me or it's causing some other issues, and I'd rather deal with the high blood pressure that I'm not feeling because I don't want to deal with the other issue that I am feeling, it makes a difference. So it goes back to that trustworthiness. But we have to tell our community also, hey, go in and advocate for yourself. Say this medicine doesn't make me feel good. It's too expensive. I need something else.
Yeah, and you have to ask for that. Is racism a part of the one of the determinants that you're looking at in terms of why why the Black community has such high blood pressure? Does that make sense?
Well, it's not. It's not part of the study itself, but we know that it plays a factor in everything in our lives. The key thing is really when you talk about an issue of equity, versus equality. Equity is where you level the playing field for, that you give people that which they need to make their situations similar to some other people that may already have advantages that others may not have. So you hope that if you can find what intervention works best, that's where the part of equity kind of comes into play. I mean, racism is just a part of American history. I mean, it's going to be there.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because when I hear, 54% of Black people having this particular disease, and you look at more than any other racial or ethnic group, it just makes you question: is that also is it the stress of it a part of what is helping to raise the blood pressure?
Well, if you think about what actually impacts blood pressure. This may bring some light to that question. Stress is always going to play a factor with that, but it's lifestyle. You think about what are the things that impact blood pressure is the diet. What do we eat? My mom's from North Carolina. I mean, it's keeping it real. I mean, she's all slim now, but but we're growing up. I mean, we fat back, bacon grease. Hey, we had it all. And it's. But think about historically, what did we have to eat back in the day? We had the scraps that nobody wanted, so which was typically pig related, and a lot of things in our diet from historical aspects we bring up into generations. So it's a cultural thing that we have learned over the years, and that's the part that we have to try to figure out how do we work around. Lack of exercise, so the things that impact weight, sodium, lack of exercise, and stress, and alcohol consumption. Those are like some of the main things that if you can attack those things, you can impact your blood pressure. And there's data that says this, up to 12 to 15 points on just lifestyle change. But the issue is getting people to do it. And that's not easy. I mean, listen, you know how a teaspoon of salt is 2,300 milligrams of sodium. 2,300 is 2,300. The diet in a hypertensive patient is supposed to be 1,500 total a day. So you talk about
all day long.
So you talk about a teaspoon of salt, and then you wipe some of that off. That is supposed to be your entire dietary sodium intake. That's not easy to do.
Yeah, and people are constantly taking the salt shakers. Go ahead.
You made me think about going to some of the fast food restaurants, and I go occasionally. I admit that. But I can tell the difference in the neighborhood I'm in based on how much salt is on the fries.
Wow. Interesting. But you're right. I hadn't thought about that, but that's true.
Yeah. And then the part I wanted to also add, Dr. Newby, is that the accessibility to the fresh fruit and vegetables, fresh meat and all in the market in our communities. That's what this equity piece you're talking about, to make sure that, again, what's being able to be purchased in my community also brings health to my body.
757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Ronald joins us from Deltaville. Hi, Ronald. You're on the air.
Hello. Thank you so much for this show.
Thank you.
I'm actually a new resident here, and my wife has handled her lupus with no medication through diet. Now, you guys finally got to diet. I can't make a phone call, and actually in a space that I had to move out of the room, so I had to run away and grab my phone and make this phone call. Long story short, you guys finally got to diet, but it just seems like the critical factor. I mean, the critical factor, we have food deserts all over this country of ours, and frankly, we are what we eat. That's just my opinion, but I just know from personal experience that diet has eliminated all medications for my wife for the lupus.
Wow.
I just thought that would just be an important element, and you guys actually touched on that.
Thank you so much for the call, Ronald. We appreciate that. What goes in makes a big difference, doesn't it, Iris?
Absolutely. And I will say this, access, we talked about access, but let's not forget the socioeconomic factor. If I can't afford what's in the grocery store, and if you want to do a good study, go to different grocery stores in different neighborhoods, pick up the same item and see what the difference of the cost is. You pay less in a more affluent neighborhood than you do in some other neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. So that's another piece we have to look at. I mean, I can't even afford the food. So what is available to me might be loaded with sodium, fat, and all of that. And if I'm a working parent and I have kids in school, I've got to navigate all of that also. So I think it's a lot that people have to navigate.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Newby, when you are prescribed medication for blood pressure, sometimes you have to have several different tries, if you will, in order to find the one that works best for you. Why is that? I mean, what's the difference between the medications that you could prescribe someone one thing and it doesn't work as opposed to something else that does?
Well, if you look at culturally, certain, especially with hypertension, our community responds to certain drugs different than other communities because some of that's based on the format of the hypertension. What's the cause of the hypertension? In our community, it's more sodium-based problems. So calcium channel blockers and diuretics work better in our population. In other populations, is ACE inhibitors, ACE receptor blockers. And there's just different categories of medications. But it's understanding everybody's a unique and different individual. The biggest issue for me is I try to pick medications based on their historical background, cultural backgrounds, and I also try to see what I have tried in the past with different groups of individuals and see what works the best because I'm very cost conscious, extremely cost conscious because I know you hate to give somebody a pill, they pay a bunch of money, they find they could take one of them and then they got to throw it away because they can't take it. So it's really an issue of figuring out how to, as best you can, make the best choice you can. I try to keep cost in mind, the background, and then I make that choice based on understanding that individual's needs. So it's kind of like
it's interesting because the medication that I'm on, the pill, it's 3 different meds.
Yes,
okay,
rolled up into one.
So right, rolled into one. That pill is ridiculously priced. Yeah. So what my doctor did was to break down and order each piece
separately,
and each piece separately. So. Yes, do I have to swallow 3 pills instead of 1 pill? Yeah, but guess what? I can afford it. Go ahead.
Barbara, you said something very important there. I think is to have those kind of conversations with your physician.
Yes.
Have that open dialogue, but also to have those kind of conversations with your pharmacist as well. Because many times I know individuals that have to go to the pharmacist and they are asked, do you have a coupon? Do you have something you can apply to this? And it's a major drop by just asking the question.
Yeah. So just look for ways that you can afford it. We had a question from Lynn in Chesapeake on Facebook. Wants to know what's the best type of home monitor to use.
Well, to be honest with you, most of all of them are actually pretty good. I mean, personally, I'm a Omron fan. That's OMRON. I've had the best results and best compliance. And I tell people all the time, you don't need the fancy bells and whistles. All you want to do is something you put on your arm, hit a button, and make sure. And you want a memory in it because you want to be able to track what those numbers have been. Now, the thing is, you have to be very careful with your arm size and cuff size, because that can either falsely elevate or lower blood pressure. So, when people ask me, what about wrist cuffs? I say, well, I use them more in my younger population than my older population. The only reason because as you get older, your artery is going to get harder, calcified, and sometimes, the wrist ones may give me a little bit higher number than what's actually there. So I have to kind of gauge it based on that. But if you can get the arm one, I think that's better personally. Omron, I found is a reliable company. It's been around forever. It's not to say any of the other ones are any worse, but that's been my experience. And so that's the one I recommend.
Yeah, my husband always has to ask for the big cuff because he's so tall.
One of the things I was going to say, Dr. Newby, as well, is to take that instrument that you're using at home and bring it to your physician's office and have them to be able to see what kind of difference that you may be getting at home.
Absolutely.
Okay, to compare what happens in the office.
And it also helps because if somebody comes to the office and their pressure is 140/90, and the first thing as a physician you want to do is, okay, you need a higher dose of your meds. But if it's white coat syndrome, that may be falsely up. But if you have home monitors, then I can see, okay, show me what you're getting at home. And the accuracy of it, because and usually when they bring them to the office, I say, okay, we'll check it, and then we'll have your machine check it, and we'll see if they're similar. Mm-hmm. That way I know they're accurate, because then I can say, okay, I can trust these numbers you're getting, and that's going to be helpful to me.
White coat syndrome, meaning that they get nervous when they see you.
But it's kind of, it's kind of interesting even with that, because a lot of people they'll debate me about that point. I say, I'm trying to help you here because your pressure, I don't want to overtreat your blood pressure, because a pressure that's too low is just as bad as being too high. Because if it drops too low, then you talk about you can shut your kidneys down. So, we have to be very diligent with that. So I said, a lot of them say, well, I don't get nervous coming to the doctor. But yet I'm like, but your pressures are higher here than they are at home. Something going on. Yeah. So I said, don't write off that. It may be a subconscious situation. I said, but don't write things off. The one thing I'm learning in medicine, you never make any assumptions in this business. You
check everything out.
Never make assumptions in this business, because you'd be surprised what might happen. So I said, keep an open mind, to it, and then go from there.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Iris.
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing people need to remember at home is how they check their blood pressure, right? Like, you shouldn't have your legs crossed. You should have already been sitting there for a few minutes. You need to make sure that you've eliminated your bladder. You have to do all those things, or your blood pressure is going to be higher.
Because I went to a doctor recently and my legs were crossed, and they said, uncross your legs. And I was like, what difference does that make? Really?
Well,
they were explaining.
Well, the reason why that's the case is you think about physiologically, when you cross your legs, you're increasing your venous return. So the venous return is the amount of blood flow coming back to the heart. Yeah, that's why I'm explaining it, because I knew you was going to give me that look. So when you cross your legs, you're essentially compressing veins, because
got you.
So that means more flow comes back to the heart. So if more flow comes back to the heart, because what creates blood pressure is the amount of cardiac output, which is how much volume is being pumped out of the heart, and your peripheral resistance, which is the amount of the resistance in the arteries themselves. So you have high volume, high resistance, pressure goes up. So if you think about it, you cross your legs, more venous return, pressure is going to go up. So if you uncross, that gives you a more accurate number, because you don't want to just have numbers all over the place, because then we're going to be suspecting the cuff. And I tell people the other time, and I'm going to tell you one thing, that we have a very anxious society. Anxiety is like a major issue.
Anxiety raises your blood pressure.
No question. So when I see that, reason why I want to see numbers, you see, I get excited about this. You can tell, why when we see high numbers and low numbers, the first thing somebody would say is something's wrong with me, because 1 minute is 160 over 100, next minute is like 110 over 70. No. I think you're just anxious. And the reason I say that is because there's only a couple of medical conditions that's going to do that. There's not many at all. Pheochromocytoma is one, and that's called an adrenal gland tumor. And I'm going to tell you, I've been in business for a minute. And I've seen that in my career 3 times, pheochromocytoma. Okay. And you just don't see it. Those are rare adrenal gland tumors. They can, and what happens is that it spills out all this adrenaline, and then the pressure shoot up, heart rate shoot up. The vast majority of those patients are anxiety driven. I mean, you'd be surprised, because stress levels make an impact, and people have a harder time now dealing with anxiety. That's why mental health clinics and things are so important.
But they also will tell you in the doctor's office sometimes too, when you take it, they take it first, and then they said, okay, just sit, just take a deep breath, just relax, and they go do something else, and then come back, which causes me more anxiety, because I got to go.
But that's why the home ones are important, for that exact reason. That's exactly why. But, when you talk about the church factor, and that's the reason why I think if you have that type of church home, and I don't want to keep blowing smoke up my pastor, but that church home, when you have that sense of family, and he's always saying, family, we need to do X. That sense of family impacts your ability to feel you're part of an organization, a group, a family, just some where you feel you belong. And that aspect impacts everything in your life. So, and when we talk about how do you manage your blood pressure, think about how, different organizations, groups, be it church or whatever you like, when you feel comfortable, how does that impact your whole physical being?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why this stuff is so important. And that's why I think having the church involved is such a big factor, because if we can create a environment that allows people to feel comfortable, that they can discuss, feel safe, they can discuss their situations, what's going on. You'd be surprised how even talking, because one thing, I feel like I'm a counselor half the time in my practice, because I have to listen to people, and that part of that understanding of that stress level helps me help them.
And actually, you bring up a good point. And Iris, we got about 2 minutes left, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
The hour has flown by. But the question I wanted to ask you is also, out of this study, do you think that this will help doctors become more culturally competent in terms of how they deal with patients, how they decide how to treat this disease?
I really do. And Dr. John Brush is a white male, but he has been going out to the churches, being a part of the services, really getting to know the people. He's bringing that information back to his colleagues. And Sentara is, we're forward thinking. We're doing other things to complement that, to make sure that our physicians are aware of what it is we're doing and how we can get better with listening and being attentive to our patients.
Okay.
And Barbara, I think in addition to that, the more we educate and empower the community, the more they are able to ask the kind of right questions when they're in the doctor's office, when they're building that relationship with their physician. They'll be able to probe a little bit more and get a greater understanding.
It seems like there's what you're doing at First Baptist and these other churches is more than the medical ministry. In other words, it's the holistic approach.
Absolutely. Because as indicated, the stressors are everywhere. And I would love to spend more time out in the community instead of at the hospital seeing people, so that healthier we can keep our community, that folks can live longer and enjoy their grandchildren and things of that nature, and not be sidelined because of illnesses that could have been prevented and managed through.
So can I get you and Iris to come back at some point and let us know how the study's going and what some of the results? Have you started getting in results yet, or is it too soon?
It's still very early.
It's still very early. Okay, Dr. Newby, you got the last minute.
Well, I would just say this. I will make this comment. Dr. Brush is going to get me later for this, but I know John has kind of gotten into this, because when he came to our church, he was actually clapping on beat. So I give hats off to John. He has gotten it. He's going to be a honorary brother. But I would just say this, all jokes aside, everybody.
I'm glad that he's coming to the churches, so that's very, very important.
It is important. But I would just say this, all jokes aside, the key thing I would say is recognize that there's an issue. Don't blow off blood pressure. And it's easy to do. Most people will blow it off because they just think they feel fine. Don't let lack of symptoms drive you down to a path of destruction.
All right. Thank you all very, very much. Reverend Jerry Holmes, Iris Lundy, and Dr. Keith Newby. Wanted to also mention that Selena Harris has joined us as our intern for the summer. She is just finished her freshman year at Virginia Commonwealth University, and we are so happy to have her with us. So thank you, Selena, and welcome aboard. And thank you, audience, for joining us this past hour. I hope you learned something new or have decided to take the right steps to control your hypertension. You can listen to this show again or share it with a friend by going to our website, anotherviewradio.org. You can also find us on Spotify or anywhere you go for your podcast listening pleasure. Next week on Another View, America's pastime, baseball, and black players. Do they mix? Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Jordan Christie is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham or Danielle Saunders answered our phones. I'm Barbara Hamley. Take your blood pressure medicine. And join me again next Thursday at noon for another view.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever, whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.